next book that I ended up reading was I Love You, subject and wow, I hate this title. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my Owls wrap up. So it is time to go over all the books that I was able to read in April for the Owls, and somehow I was able to complete all 12 classes, which means I am one step closer to my career, which was to be a Transfiguration professor with an Animagus training on top of that. And y'all, I'm coming for McGonagall. She is my inspiration. I'm turning into her. It's great. I'm hoping not to spend too much time because I do have 12 books. And I had 13 last month, and that one was long, and I'm hoping not to be that long again. So I will leave a link down below to all of the vlogs, because I did vlog this entire month, and I think I go into more detail on those. I'm going to try to just do like highlights and general thoughts on these and not too in-depth, but we'll see. Hopefully we won't be here forever. Check those out if you haven't already, and if you're curious about my real-time thoughts, because I do go a little bit more in-depth, I think. But with that being said, let's get into the statistics. So this month I was able to read quite a lot. I read 4,164 pages, which is roughly, I think, maybe not quite 100, but almost 100 more than, maybe about 50 pages more than I read last month. But in that, I was able to read 5 audiobooks and 7 physical books. As far as age category goes, I was able to read 2 middle grade, 5 YA, and 5 adult. And then my genres were kind of all over the place. I had 1 mystery, 4 contemporary, 4 fantasy, 1 classic, 1 historical fiction, and 1 sci-fi. And then as far as my star ratings goes, I did have a couple like 0.5 in this, so I rounded it out. So if it was like 3.5, I put it with a 3 stars. But I was able to have 2 5 stars, 8 4 stars, 1 3 star, and 1 2 star. So let's just go in and talk about the books that I read. I'm excited. The very first book that I was able to read this month was Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, which I ended up giving 4 stars to. This was for my prompt of arithmancy, which was to read a book out of my comfort zone. I don't usually read mystery books. It's just like, I like mystery books. I just like don't gravitate towards them, and I've had this one for a while and I've never read an Agatha Christie. I found a random audiobook at my library and I was able to get it, and it came in like right before April started, so I was like, we're gonna start with this. This book was really good. I wasn't sure how I was feeling about it for most of the book. It is in 3rd person, but you're basically following the investigator, which is Hercule Poirot. He is on this train and a murder happens on this train, and he's basically like interviewing everybody on the train to figure out what happened, because they were stuck on a track and it is snowing, so they can't move anywhere. And so he knows that whoever killed this guy didn't leave because there's no feet print anywhere. So it's very slow, but it's very methodical, because she writes it like you're kind of in his head figuring this out. So like it's very little build up to get on the train. 90% of this book takes place on the train. And then like the middle of the book is like there's a chapter dedicated to every single person on this train and their interview with Poirot. And so it's very well thought out. And you think, like, I didn't know who did it until we got to the end, and, like, you don't even feel bad about the killing, because, like, the guy that died is kind of a jerk. So this mystery just, like, hit all of the right things for me, and I want to read more of her stuff now, because I really want to see her style in other books. So it is kind of dry, I think is the best way to describe it, but you kind of get sucked in, and I think listening to the audiobook of this was really smart for me, because I just picked a random one, but the guy who narrated it, which if you saw my vlogs, you know I like raved about, was Dan Stevens, who was Matthew Crawley on Downton Abbey. He played the Beast in Beauty and the Beast with Emma Watson. But in this audiobook, there's a ton of different people, because this train has people from America, it has people from like Britain and England, it's got our main character who is French, we've got I think a Swedish person in there might be someone who's from Russia. There's like people from all over the place, so he has a wide range of accents that he has to do, and it just made it so much better. So I highly suggest the audiobook of this. It's like now one of my favorite audiobooks. I think the story was really good, but I think the audiobook made it better for me personally because her writing style was so dry at the beginning. But I still really want to read more from her. So if you have any like Agatha Christie books that you love, let me know. The next book that I picked up was The Austere Academy, which is the 5th in the series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. I read this one for the astronomy prompt, which was to read a book when it was dark outside. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really liked this book. I have a lot of the same feelings as I did with the 4th one. It like annoyed me more than some other books, but that's mainly because the guardian or like the principal, I think, of the school that they're at is a jerk, and we really, really don't like him. And then there's a girl at the school as well that we really don't like. But the orphans finally, you know, get to have friends. They have a couple friends at the school who are in the very, very same, very similar position of how like their parents and their other sibling died because they were triplets and there's only 2 left. And so like having friends there really helped them out, and it was really nice seeing that part of it. And there's also things in this book that are now starting to hint towards the rest of the series because each book has its own plot, but then there's the overarching plot of the series, but it doesn't really get started until about this one. It was good. I liked it. So I ended up giving it 4 stars because it was just a blast to read. I do prefer reading these in one day, so having to read this over like the course of a few days was hard because I just wanted to keep reading this book. But I did enjoy it. So 4 stars, really great. So the next book that I ended up picking up was I Love You by Erin Lyon. I loved it. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and I read this one for Muggle Studies, which was to read a book written by a Muggle, aka a contemporary. And this one is set in a world where it is contemporary, but basically there is no marriage. It is a 7-year contract instead. And this follows our main character named Kate, who is really happy. She just got out of law school. She didn't get a job that she wanted, but she's with the man of her dreams, but then the man of her dreams doesn't, you know, redo their contract, and so she's single again and she needs a job, so she goes into signing law, which is the part of law that she refused to do, but she needs money, so she is now part of that. And it's ridiculous because at one point there's 3 different guys after her. It's a little crazy. I did end up giving this one 4 stars because I just flew through this book. It was so fun. It was so easy. If you want something that you're not going to need to think hard about, this is your kind of like palate cleanser book. It was good. I loved it. It's very trope heavy, so just kind of be aware of that going into it if that's not your thing. But I liked it. It follows the trope of like the main character doesn't know she's pretty. She has multiple people after her. Her best friend is the beauty. I don't know. There's just a lot that's like I can understand and would annoy people. But like once I realized that's what we were getting with this book, I was fine with it. Does that make sense? Like once I knew that it wasn't going to be anything amazing, I still had like a grand time. Who am I? I do really like her writing style. She's super ridiculously sarcastic. She is so funny. I do really like this one. Actually, I'm going out of order a little bit because this is the first in the series and I ended up reading the sequel, which is Unconditionally. And this one fit the prompt of Charms, I believe, which was to read a book with a white cover. So I'm just going to go ahead and do these together because I gave this one a 4 star as well. Everything that I said about the first book, same thing about the second book. The one thing that I will say about this series is that it just stops. So basically what it felt like is this was an entire story, and then she just took the story and split it in half and said, ooh, this is good, send it out into the world. And then with this one, she said, ooh, I'm going to add a little paragraph here and a little paragraph here so you can remember who all these people are. And we're done. So like, it's very abrupt how this one ends. And I think if she had taken the first chapter in the second book and just tacked it on to the end of the first book, that would have been a good place to stop it. I loved the writing. I think she's really funny. And I don't think she's written anything else, which makes me sad. But it was great. I had a fun time reading these. The next book that I ended up picking up was The Everlasting Rose by Donnell Clayton, which I read for my Transfiguration prompt, which was to read a prompt with, or like read a book with transfiguration or like shape-shifting in it. And because of the magic system in this book, that's what I went with. So this is the sequel, or the second in the Bells series. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. I I will admit that it has been a while since I read the first one, and I couldn't find a good summary online to remind me about the events at the end of it, so I did kind of feel disconnected for that reason. But with that being said, I just felt disconnected from the story as a whole. There were some things that I really liked. I did really like how it ended. I think that there's going to be another one, at least one more in the series, but I feel like this is a good way to stop. Like, I feel like this is a good ending so that she didn't need to write another one. I don't know what it was. I just kind of felt disconnected from a lot of this story, and I don't know why. Like, I can't put my finger on it. And what else can I say about this book? Oh, I did like the writing style. I do like Danielle Clayton's writing style. It's very poetic, and it's kind of the way that she does it, and I really like the way that she writes. I don't even know if I can say anything beyond that. It's lyrical, it's poetic, there's just some kind of beauty to it, and the way that she describes certain things that I just really like. So 3.5. It was a good middle of the road meh book. Maybe it should be 3, but I'm gonna stick with 3.5 anyway. The next book started off where my mood for reading is right now, and that is Snicket and the Watsons by Jane Austen. These are 2 of her unfinished works, and I didn't know how I was going to feel because they are unfinished. I was really worried about them. I ended up reading this one for Potions, which was to read a book under 150 pages, but I loved these so much. And the one thing that I'm bitter about is out of these 2, I loved the Watsons. The Watsons felt like a Jane Austen novel. It felt fantastic. It fit right in with the rest of her works, whereas Snicket is a little bit different. It's more about a girl who goes to a town to, like, as a visitor for friends, and just kind of is like witnessing the ridiculousness that is these people. So it's like slightly different than what Jane Austen usually is. A lot of people view it as like if she had continued to live, we would have seen a new era of Jane Austen basically, and I think Snicket would have started that off. Because out of these 2 books, it sounds like the Watsons was abandoned and Snicket was what she was working on to actually be published, because the Watsons is basically a 40-page paragraph. Like, that's what it looks like, whereas Snicket actually had little, chapters in it. So, like, she wrote up to chapter 12. She was, like, basically writing it like an actual book, whereas the Watsons just kind of felt like she was putting stuff on a page. It was just really good. I loved going back into a book that was by Jane Austen that I didn't know. It was such a fun time. I just loved being in these 2, like, kind of being in her head a little bit. So yeah, I'm so glad I read these. I put them off for so long, but I finally did it, and I'm so happy. And I gave it 5 stars because it just made my heart happy. It just did. I followed that one up with my lowest rated book of the month, and that is The Wizards of Earthsea. Let me move over so you can see it. The Wizard of Earthsea, which is the first in the Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin. This one was for History of Magic, which was to have a book that involves witches or wizards, and our main character is a wizard. And then I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. I did listen to the audiobook of it. The audiobook wasn't great, but I don't think that hindered my enjoyment of it, I guess, because it's very slow. A lot of people say that this book is a very slow book, and I totally get that. I am curious to see where the story's going to go, because I feel like this is the end. Like, I don't know where it's going to go from here, because I thought that in this book he basically creates a villain, or like a villain entity character, and I thought it was going to be like that's what he was going to follow throughout this entire series, but it's not. It's just like this one book, I think. I don't really know. So I'm curious to continue maybe like one more just to see, but I did read this for the Le Guin along that Ashley from Falling Through Fiction is doing. I might continue it because they're not very long books, and I can get the audiobooks from my library pretty quickly. I just didn't love it. I don't think that classical fantasy writing style is for me. It reminded me a lot of Lord of the Rings, and I think that's why. However, I like the Lord of the Rings, and this one I just didn't, and I think it's because things happen in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and I felt like things didn't really happen in this book. I don't know, I just didn't really like it. It was okay. I don't know. It was just like Can you see how little I wrote in my book because I didn't care? So the next one I picked up was my other 5-star read, and there's a theme here. And this one was The Missing Manuscript of Jane Austen by Cherie James. This is for the herbology prompt, which is to read a book that starts with the letter M. This was freaking amazing. I loved this book. This basically follows this woman who buys a poetry book. Sometimes in older books you had to like actually split the pages, and a couple of them didn't. So she did that, and in doing so found an unfinished letter that Jane Austen was writing to her sister, and it talked about a missing manuscript, and that sets her off on this grand adventure to go find it. I'd say a good 80% of this book is actually the physical manuscript, because once they find it, they just sit down and read it. Oh my gosh, the manuscript was my favorite part because it felt like a Jane Austen book. She's just, oh my god, she's so good. And like, there are things that happen in the manuscript that wouldn't have happened. Like, there are stakes that are higher than Jane Austen would have made them, but that's because of the audience that she's writing for. The audience now wouldn't think twice about some of the things that like people in that time that Jane Austen would have put them through. Like, it wouldn't have been the end of the world. The writing is a little bit easier to read, but beyond a couple of things that she tweaked as far as like the writing, the way she describes things, there's more dialogue in her manuscript than Jane Austen would have had in it, and there's more descriptions of like the landscape and stuff than Jane Austen would have had in her novels. The feel and the essence of this book is 100% Jane Austen. I can see if Jane Austen were alive today, this is what she would write. Like, I can 100% believe that. I cared more about the physical manuscript and the characters in the manuscript than I did about the characters who found the manuscript, because it was great. I loved it. I connected with this book so much. It was fantastic. It was great. I loved it. I don't know what else to say. It was amazing. It's now one of my favorite books. This will for sure be one of my favorite books of the year. Y'all, it was good. The next book that I ended up picking up was Paper Hearts by Meg Wibbett. This one was for my Ancient Runes, which is to read a book with heart on the cover or in the title. This one I ended up giving 4 stars to. It is written in verse, so if you don't like verse books, this isn't going to be for you. Y'all know I love me some verse books. Verse is chef's kiss for me. This one basically follows 2 girls who were in Auschwitz during World War II and the Nazi invasion and all of that kind of stuff. And it is based on a real story, which I didn't actually know. But basically these 2 girls don't have families, so they become each other's family with a few other girls in the camp. I said in my vlogs that I thought that the synopsis spoiled it, but I guess it really doesn't. Basically, in this book, the 2 girls like get together and they become friends and stuff, and then one of the girls turns 20, I want to say, in this book, and to celebrate her birthday, the other girl creates a paper heart and has all of the girls in their camp sign it. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to have paper. You're not allowed to have glue. You're not allowed to have scissors. Like, everything about this was illegal, and if they were caught, they would have all died, but they did it anyway so that she would have something with her on her birthday, and it was just beautiful. And also, that really happened. Like, in the back of the book, like, there's a picture of the actual heart, and it folds out between, like, for multiple pages, and people, like, wrote on it in tons of different ways, and it's just, these people lived, and they actually, like, risked their lives so that this girl could have a decent birthday. It was just really good. But because it's in verse, it does have that, like, poetic, lyrical edge to the way that she writes, but it's about the Holocaust, so she doesn't shy away from what's happening. So it's lyrical and beautiful, yet really gritty at the same time, and she just meshes those 2 styles in her writing perfectly. The one thing that I will say about this book is it is from dual perspective, so we do follow both girls in this book. However, there is no difference in their voice, so it's really hard to tell who is talking. So I did like what they did, at least in this book, is at the very bottom of the page, they would write, or she would put who was talking out of the 2 girls, so that, here's the other one, so that you could remember. The way that it is formatted is there are chapters in this book. For example, this is chapter 5, and that's from her perspective, and then she's got a good handful of just going to call them poems basically. So a good handful of poems. And then the next chapter is from the next girl's perspective. So it kind of is in chunks like that. So it's not like every single verse poem switches back and forth, because that would be a lot. But there is, like I said, no difference in their voices, so it is hard to tell them apart. So if you're not paying attention, you could miss that. So you kind of do have to pay attention. But I liked having those dual perspectives. It wasn't perfect, but it was good, and I did love it. The next book that I read was The School for Good and Evil, the third in this series by Someone Shinani, The Last Ever After. This was my biggest book. This one took me so long to get through, but I read this one for Care of Magical Creatures, which was to have a cover with beaks on it, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. And the only reason it was 4.5 and not 5 is because it took me a little too long to get into the story. This is not my favorite book in the series so far, but it has some of my favorite moments in it, if that makes sense. So I love this because we got a lot of backstory on our main characters. We got a lot of backstory on Agatha, Sophie, and Tedros' parents. Just having that backstory like layered in, I think was great. It was good. I liked it. The ending was perfection. Like, that's how I wanted this story to end, and it did. And I'm so excited to see what's going to happen next. Another thing, I feel like I talked about this in one of my vlogs, is that the Tedros character annoyed me so much in this book. I don't know why. This book specifically, like, he annoys me as a person anyway, but this book really got me, and I just wanted to throw things at his face. But also Sophie. Okay. So Sophie's character. This is not just a this book thing. This is all 2 books before this one as well. She basically flip-flops all the time. So every time I think I know that she's going to do something, and I'm like, okay, I finally can figure out who Sophie is as a person, she flip-flops again, and I'm like, damn it. Okay, now I have no idea what's going to happen. And after a while, like, it's very tiring. And I'm glad that, like, we finally have, like, an end in this book. Like, hopefully the next 3 aren't going to be as flip-floppy, at least not with her. Because it drove me insane. It drove me insane. I was done. She needed to stop. And the very last thing that I will say about this book, which is my favorite thing about this book, is they have, like, so in this story, they have some of the characters come back. So basically, the kids in this world that we're following are the kids of, like, the famous fairy tales that we know. For example, Tedros is the son of King Arthur and Guinevere. We've got a kid who's the son of Captain Hook. We've got, like, all that kind of stuff. And so some of the main people, like Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, Cinderella comes back, Merlin shows up. So they all kind of show up in this book. And there is a moment between Agatha and the Cinderella character where Cinderella is telling her backstory. Okay. Most fairy tale retellings are told in a way that it's like, so you know this story, but now we're going to tell it from the villain's perspective, which makes the hero the villain in that kind of retelling. The way that she tells her story in here is not like that, and it is my favorite retelling of Cinderella that I have ever read. It was so good, and it was like a whole 5 pages in this, like maybe 5 pages. Like, it's not even a big part of the book. It's just a little thing that I plop in, but it was so good, and I loved it so much. It just, like, really made you think. It was, my favorite thing in the series so far was that story. The next book that I ended up picking up was The Beholder by Anna Bright. This one was for my Defense Against the Dark Arts class, which was to read a book set on or by the Seer Coast. So I did end up giving this one 4 stars. It's not amazing. It's not the most amazing book I've ever read, and it did take a little while to get into, but without me realizing, I came to really care about these characters to the point where, while reading this book, I laughed, I cried, I threw a book because I was like, these people are idiots. I threw a book because I was so excited because something happened that I wanted to happen, and I called it. I had all of the emotions while I was reading this book, and I still am not quite sure how I got there, But starting this book to ending this book, somewhere along the way, I came to really like this story. And there is a sequel coming out in June, I want to say, so you bet I'm going to try to find that because I need to know what happens in this story because it was just, oh my gosh, it was so good. This is one that I will say is, I can see being forgetful, so I'm glad that the sequel is coming out. Like, I read it relatively soon to when the sequel is coming out, because if I had waited like a year, I would have forgotten everything in this book, I think. But it's still really good. I will say there is instances of, I wouldn't call it insta-love, but I would call it love really quickly, because the whole point of this is our main girl is basically shipped off to find a husband, and is said, you can't come home unless you have a suitor. And it's just, she creates bonds with multiple guys really quickly, and then something happens and it snaps and she's like, screw you, and leaves, and then the next guy comes in. So while there is a bond in here with a guy that she kind of ends up being like the guy for her, I really love, I think he's perfect for her there. I think they're perfect together, and he kind of like brings out who she is and brings out this boldness in her that she's always had. She's just been too scared to like say it. They do happen really quickly, and they do kind of like register that that is happening. They do register, wow, we've only known each other for a couple of weeks, like this is kind of crazy, but like they go with it. So just be aware of that. The one thing that does annoy me about this book though is on Goodreads, and everything I've heard about this book is that it is fantasy. There are zero fantastical elements in this book at all. It is kind of a dystopian world, so it is set in America, but America is basically like Europe now and has a bunch of different like colonies, and they all have like nobility that leads them, and she has to still marry because she's a female, and like she can inherit and be the ruler, but she still has to have a man. Our author definitely got bits and pieces from like our actual history and like layered it in this book, especially with like different cultures, because there's a lot of different languages that are present in this book and like are used as names for certain places. So like the world is a little confusing. So I'm glad I listened to the audiobook of this, because I would not be able to say any of the names. The moral of the story is that it was good and I enjoyed it, but there were parts that were bizarre. The end. And the very last book that I ended up reading this month was Brightly Burning by Alexa Dawn, and that was for the prompt of divination, which was the random TBR that I did, or like the randomized number that I did in my TBR video. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and this one is basically like a retelling of Jane Eyre set in space. The thing that I liked about this book was the world, like the world that she created, because this is set at a time where Earth has gone through a second ice age and has kicked everyone out, basically, and so they all go up into spaceships that orbit the Earth, basically waiting for Earth to be okay to live on again. And then, like, if your ship basically falls apart, you go back down to Earth, but, like, no one has heard from a couple of the ships that went back down to Earth to see if they could survive. So the world itself is very creative. I liked that. The plot was not. The plot was quite literally the exact same as Jane Eyre, to the point where, like, in my head, I was using the wrong names for these books, for the characters in this book, because, like, our main character's name is Stella, but I called her Jane Eyre in my head, like, so many times, because there was just not enough difference for me to really see it. I will admit that the last, like, 25% of the story was different. It still kind of followed the plot line, but it was a little more creative in how it did things, so I did like that part of it. So, like, that's my biggest gripe with this, is that, like, it's not original in its retelling, which is why it didn't get a full 5. But I do really like the Jane Eyre story, which is why I did like this one a lot. But I did enjoy my time reading it. I was on the edge of my seat. I stayed up until, like, 3 a.m. To finish it, because it was so good. So I did like this. I will say, though, this is not a book to read if during this quarantine period if you don't like reading books that remind you of what's happening outside, because it's not very much, so it's like 10% of the book, but it does have quarantine, and it does have a deadly virus that goes around. And so just like be wary of that, but I did want to mention that if you are interested in this sci-fi retelling, if that like is something that you want to steer away from, maybe wait a few months before you read this. I actually really liked it, so yay. So that's basically all I've got for you guys today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books, if you participated in the Owls, how you did on your career, what your favorite book of the month was. If you didn't participate in the Owls, let me know how your reading has been. But if you did like this video, make sure to give a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. I also have all my social media down there if you want to follow me along on any of those. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!